So yeah, it's not recording. Okay. So I'm hoping to have these uploaded by the next day, but it might be a couple days. So as I was just mentioning to Nate, I had an awful day at work today, and did not get to go over all of the things that I wanted to go over. So depending upon how this goes tonight, I might extend this to like a two-parter. But even if I do, but I'm if I do that, I might the second part might roll into chapter 23. We might just like quickly do that. So chapter 22, I don't think I can emphasize enough how important chapter 22 is. I mentioned before that if you break up Abraham's life into kind of like a 3-act play, the climax of the first portion of his life is kind of chapter 15, that first, or like the big like official call and like promise and being like, hey, this is like I'm gonna bless you, I'm gonna do all of this stuff. And that's kind of the initial thing. And then there's a bunch of like outfall of that, and then slowly building up of Abraham as a prophet. This chapter is the climax of Abraham's life. And kind of the reverberations of this event are referenced throughout the Bible. And this event is going to end up becoming kind of the pattern of so many other stories that take place in the Bible. So far, we've been talking a lot about different patterns that have gone on in and that have gone on in the Bible so far, and we've had these repeated patterns and these repeated stories, and most of those have all been falls. All right, they've all been falls, series of falls, and essentially going down. Events where you go down into death, go down into Egypt, all of these different things. And the only events where we've had people attempting to go up is the attempt to go up in a way that is devoid of God and God's leaning, and that's with the Tower of Babel incident, right? That's an attempt to go up. We are now going to get into a pattern of going up a mountain. And that becomes significant because that pattern is going to get repeated at Sinai. It's going to get repeated at the temple. It's going to get repeated at basically all of the things that Jesus does. All right, the Sermon on the Mount, the Transfiguration, and ultimately his death. All of those are stories where he's going up a mountain, or humanity is going up the mountain. And the thing that happens at the top of a mountain is modeled on this story. And the best way that I can describe it is it's both like a kind of a loss of life with a revelation from God. You have those that turning, that loss of life and that revelation of God. Let me get my list here of um I think I'm just gonna try and hit these as we go through it. Um, well, no, I'll say a couple of other things first. So Abraham is thought of as like the father of the faith, right? So much so that people were like, okay, we modern scholarship, or a lot of times they'll like, if you just talk about like who started monotheistic faiths, people will say like Abraham, right? That's why a lot of times they'll be like the Abrahamic religions. Nowadays, mostly because of like different discoveries and archaeological discoveries, and we know more about Zoroastrianism. People are like, oh, Zoroastrianism was kind of around too, which is kind of monotheistic. It's more dualistic, but whatever. But and I just want us to take a minute to think about this idea of the founding of a religion. At what point in Abraham's life does he found a religion, quote unquote? He doesn't write a book. He doesn't get followers. As we discussed before, it's debatable whether even he knows the name of God, right?
I feel like he doesn't.
I
He doesn't.
I feel like he doesn't.
I was just like, I was like, I'm gonna read Exodus, and
Well-
and then I was like, wait, the Jews don't even really know it, so
Don't.
I don't think Abraham does.
Well, and that's precisely the reason why they refer to him as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, is because they don't know his name. They're just like that God that was there and did all of these things. And so they kind of give him these titles, but they don't know his name. So Abraham doesn't really found a religion in the way that modern people think about someone going through the process of founding a religion. The person that's probably closer to that would actually be like Moses, right? Because when we think of like the person that founds a religion, we think of someone that like, ooh, writes a thing down, puts all these prescriptions in there, says do this stuff, don't do that stuff. This is the way that the world actually works. This is the way it doesn't actually work. But I think it's right to see Abraham as the person that, as the founder of of religion. If you think about what a religion is slightly differently from the modern way that we do it.
I feel like he's the first one that kind of started following God. So,
What-
like, not so much he founded the religion, but maybe he's the first one that started following it.
So
Kind of.
not just following it, yes, but not just following it. And I'm going to make the argument that this event right here, if you're going to point to any one event to say that's when Abraham founds the religion, this is where he does it. And it's because what a religion actually is, so the word religion, all right, it comes from a Latin, the Latin like root of it actually means binding. And it's a binding, it's an obligation. And what is this story famously called? This story is famously called The Binding of Isaac. And you should think of that binding as because yes, it's when he started he voluntarily like went after God, but it's more that he bound himself to God. He bound his identity, he bound his future, he bound everything about himself
And
to God.
Didn't he also kind of do that though when the whole covenant and the circumcised his whole household and all that?
He does, but this is like, but again, like gradations of that, right? Because that's right. Talk about how like the circumcision is like a mini. Circumcision is a mini cutting off of the flesh, right? And when we talked about circumcision, actually, right, we talked about you cut off the flesh to avoid being cut off, and being cut off means that you don't have any kids. That's what being cut off means, right? That's why you have levirate marriage, where if you die and you don't have any, like if you're married and you die and you don't have any kids, your wife is supposed to marry your brother and have a kid that way. And that's specifically so that your line doesn't get cut off, right? Even though, because again, they didn't know about genetics, and so that's not what they were going for there, really. What they're going for, they treat that kid as the kid of the guy that died. And so he gets all of his inheritance and like all of his stuff. And so you have, that's a miniature version of what's happening here, where Abraham is being put into an instance of being cut off everything, because that's what his son is, right? So, but yeah, so that's why I'm saying like this is like the moment where it really happens for real, and it's not just kind of a small mini foreshadow of like what's to come. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just saying that because like that seems like what most people would counter what you're saying with, because that like,
Maybe.
kind of big, but again, I know this is big too.
Yeah,
This is
I'm
like
just,
the-
More about it. I was
that's
just-
what, that's why I'm
One
wording
word.
it. That's why I'm wording it as
This is like the next
Climax.
gradation of it.
yeah.
physically a climax.
Yes, exactly. Okay. So let's let's start going through it some. I've rambled enough for 15 minutes, so
2. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. He said, Here I am. He said,
okay. So yeah, this is the right time to talk about it. I wanted to reference, and actually, I'm just gonna straight play it for you guys. I wanted to reference is it in this playlist? Oh, I don't know if it's in that playlist. Hold on.
Although it is him also down. Oh, is this the one Jewish song guy?
Yes.
Jewish song guy.
Jewish
Not-
song guy.
Not Jewish artist.
Yeah. So I'm gonna play this song for you guys actually, mostly because it's really short.
Can you sing it for me?
Maybe. It's not that long. It's Abraham.
I have to read the lips when I don't know what they're saying.
Well, I'll try, and it should actually come up with the lyrics. But okay. So this album is called Akeda. This song is called Akeda. It's the last song on the album. Okay, see, that's a different album. So it's the last song on the album. The word that he says in the song repeatedly a couple times is ayeka, which is a different word. Ayeka means where are you? Ayeka, if you remember, because I talked about it, is the first question that God asks man in the garden, right? At the fall, right? And we talked about two different like patterns like fall pattern, elevation pattern. And he asks man, "Where are you?" And man hides, right? And that's a pattern that goes on now, forever. It's always gone on. What's happening in this story is that Abraham is not hiding. Abraham is revealing himself to God. Also, what is happening? So, Akedah means binding, right? So, it's the binding of Isaac. And so, there's that relationship there between God asking you, "Where are you at?" and a response being a binding of some sort. I'll play the song now.
I step into your glory. I step into the house. A house inside. How can I talk to you? It's the same story. I share your space and a heart.
That's the start of the common daily prayer that Jews say.
Teach me to love. Teach me to love. I'm gonna take your son, take your blade, take your 3 long nights, 3 long days, and the bunch at the mount of the Lord. Yes, you've been times before in your dreams, fantasy, reality, still bleeding. I have to love. Teach me to love. I have to love. I take your son, take your blade, take your reloads, and approach to the mountain of the Lord. Yes, the time is near. In your dreams, fantasy, reality, only teach me to go. I know I
Okay. So, part of what I think is interesting and really powerful about this song, one, Matisyahu is not a Christian. Okay. But you can tell from the lyrics that he is tying this story about the binding of Isaac to this idea of teach me how to love, which in the vast majority of commentaries that you will read that this is a testing of Abraham's faith. And one of the arguments that I am going to make, that I want you to try and get, is that it's kind of that. It's kind of a testing of his faith. But it's more like a demonstration of his resolve and also the enormity of God, right? It's more, and this is why I want to say that it's more like a revelation of God's character and God's relationship with us. One of the things that I also think is interesting about this is, especially those last two verses, what is, like, yes, it's Madishah who's singing, but who's the person singing it? Who's the one saying it? Right? Where it says, Abraham, Abraham, take your son, take your blade, take your rope, 3 long nights, 3 long days, and approach the mountain of the Lord. Teach me to love. That speech is from the perspective of God. And so in this song, which again, it's this song, not explicitly in the text. In this song, he has this idea of God wanting Abraham to teach him the depth of his love, both the depth of his love for his son and for him. And what does it take? What does it take to answer that question of where are you and how do we get together? How do we reconcile, right? Because that's the whole question that's being presented in Genesis, is we were together and then we did a bunch of fallings for a really long time, and now we're trying to get back together. How do we do it? Something has to bleed. Something has to give, right? I feel like I've talked about this before, right? Of we have historical oppression. We have all of these. Personally, I don't know how you can sing a song like that or read a story like this and not also see that the ultimate answer to these questions is going to be Jesus. Jesus is the ultimate answer to these questions, because it's like you read this story of God being like, what's it going to take? And Abraham, I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna demonstrate to you what it's going to take. The cost is going to be your son. The cost is going to be your everything. But what he does is he goes, I'm not going to require it of you. That leaves a big open question then throughout the entire Old Testament, which is, if that's the requirement, when is that requirement getting paid? And in the Old Testament, it never does. It never gets paid. It's not until Jesus comes that that requirement gets paid. So those are kind of the things that I want you to have and like running through your head as you're reading this. Okay. Okay. Let's keep going.
Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him.
Okay. So maybe 2 verses at a time is enough. So the land of Moriah. We'll talk about that for a bit. We're not sure where that is. It is it's really up for debate. But the main sources for identifying where it's at comes later in Chronicles. And later books say where Mount Moriah is. And basically the place that they put Mount Moriah is the Temple Mount. And they identify the Temple Mount as being that same place. So you also have to remember where. So do you guys know? So where's Abraham at the start of the story? Do you guys remember? Do you remember from last week where we left off?
Wasn't he at
He's at Beersheba, which Beersheba is all the way in the south, right? And
The answer is always the Negev. I swear.
well, there's only two places so far. It's the Negev or the middle, right? Mamre or Negev.
Sometimes we go to Egypt,
Yeah,
never make it.
exactly. That's basically it. But so he's in like Beersheba, right? So he's kind of at the bottom, right? And so he's journeying back up. There's also I actually saw a thing which I guess I didn't fully realize, but it makes a lot of things click in my head. There was a meme that somebody made of how long it takes to walk from Egypt to Jerusalem, and it's like 6 days. and people are like, man, get a map. But it actually makes a lot of sense of some things that kind of whatever.
Depending on where you are, it takes one step actually. Every day.
But so it makes sense that he's not at Mamre, because Mamre would have been like right there. Because Mamre's sort of in the middle too, and also would be going down. But so here he's going up, and so he's going up geographically, but he's also going up vertically, up the mountain. And it's going to eventually be the place where the sacrifices on the temple are made, right? And so it's the same kind of thing. And so you have this, again, this substantiation, because so much of Jewish religion and faith is based around the temple and around doing things at the temple. It makes kind of sense that this is where we're really like getting started with the actual religious practices, and not just like the extensions of like this one family. You will also hear some other debated locations for Mount Moriah. One of them that you should be aware of is what Muslims say. So Muslims say that Mount Moriah, and I think they actually pronounce it differently, but they say that mountain and where this story takes place is actually in Mecca. So in Mecca, near the Kaaba, which, do you guys know what the Kaaba is? It's a big black square thing that they all walk around and pray. That's where they think that this story takes place. And also in Islam, it's not the binding of Isaac, it's the binding of Ishmael. They switch the sons out in the story.
Mountain nearby that justifies that?
It's just because Ishmael's their
And
No, not that. That justifies their take that it's in Mecca.
probably, I don't know the geography that well.
All right.
I mean, well,
Well, be that big.
yeah, and here's the thing: a mountain doesn't have to be that big, because actually saying that it's the Temple Mount, the Temple Mount's not that big.
Yeah, it's not really
Like,
big hill.
yeah, it's just a big hill. There are other mountains around Jerusalem that are bigger than the Temple Mount. So if you click on Moriah, like in like the Step Bible or whatever, it'll say chosen by Jehovah, and I think that it's a weird rendering. It should be chosen by Yah, because Yah is the ending thing, Mount Moriah. And again, you have that same little Yah is the shorter version of Yahweh. And so that's how like that gets its place name. Are you serious right now?
Is there a missing stick?
Great owner.
Do you have your snake?
It crawled in the couch. In the couch? Yeah. Do these cushions lift?
No, the cushions do not lift.
Okay,
Just drop some food down there.
it's fine.
Do you know what snakes eat?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Like
That was not a viable alternative.
you realize that I told you that I'm not ever looking for Snake again if you lose him.
Yeah. I didn't. I technically haven't lost him.
Lost.
No.
Oh, freaking.
We're gonna keep going and ignore
The serpent.
the serpent being loosed upon the world. Go put makeup. Okay. Yeah, we're just gonna keep going because I've lost it now.
On the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to
Oh.
his young men,
Third day, Jesus is buried for 3 days. That connection should be
band.
obvious. The band third day, yeah. Whatever.
"Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you." And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." So they went both of them together. When they came to the
Right. So you
Little
have
did he know.
right, and so you have this idea, right? You have this idea of God will provide him for himself the lamb of the burnt offering. And he does provide a ram. But you also have the idea that you see throughout the Old Testament of animal sacrifices are like, right, you have this obedience is better than sacrifice thing, right? That's not really what it is. But also God is going to provide for this somehow. I'm sure many of you have also heard the idea of Abraham's expectation in the line where where is it, where he says to you, "Stay here with the donkey, I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you," right? And there's this expectation that Abraham has that somehow both of them are going to come back. And there's a lot of discussion about that, about what could Abraham have been thinking there. Was Abraham thinking, what was Abraham thinking, that God would raise Isaac back from the dead? What was he thinking that what exactly what occurred, which is that he's going to back out and not have me do it? Was Abraham thinking, this is just a thing that I'm going to say because I don't really know what else to say? And that's where I want to yeah, so I guess this is probably a good time to talk a little bit about Kierkegaard. Do you guys know who Kierkegaard is? Okay. So Soren Kierkegaard is a pretty famous, very famous actually, a philosopher. I believe he's Dutch. Yeah, I think he's Dutch or something like that. But he has he's the one that actually came up with the expression taking a leap of faith. And most of the time people use that expression like leap of faith as like, I don't know, it's kind of a dumb thing to do. Like, you want me to take a leap of faith and I'm not going to, and all that stuff. He has like a whole essay on how like leaps of faith are like the most important things that you can ever do in like your life. And like that they're like central to like being and all this stuff. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about is the idea that he has around a thing called the Night of Faith. And so let me find. Am I spelling this word right? No, I'm not. Okay. So the Night of Faith feels what the night of infinite resignation feels, but with the exception that the Night of Faith believes that in this world, in this life, they will be together. The Night of Faith will say, I believe nevertheless that I shall. Okay, yeah, let me read this whole. I'll start at the beginning. So there's two different. Okay, so Kierkegaard can contrast the Night of Faith with the Night of infinite resignation. He uses the story of a princess and a man who is madly in love with her, but circumstances are such that the man will never be able to realize this love that he has for this princess in this world. A person who is in the aesthetic stage. So he also has different levels of being: the aesthetic level of being, the ethical level of being, and the religious level of being. The religious level of being is the highest and encompasses all of the lower levels. If you're just at the aesthetic stage, you abandon this love, crying out, such a love is foolishness. The rich brewer's widow is a match fully as good and respectable. And so you just move on to a different match. A person who is in the ethical stage would not give up on his love of the princess, but would be resigned to the fact that they will never be together in this world. The Night of infinite resignation may or may not believe that they will be together in another life or in another spirit. But what is important is that the Night of infinite resignation gives up on their being together in this life, in this world. The Night of Faith feels that that same feeling that the Night of infinite resignation feels, but with the exception that the Night of Faith believes that in this world, in this life, they will be together. The Night of Faith will say, I believe nevertheless that I shall get her, in virtue of this, in virtue of the absurd, in virtue of the fact that with God all things are possible. The double movement is paradoxical because on one hand, it is humanly impossible that they will be together. But on the other hand, the Night of Faith is willing to believe that they will be together through divine possibility. So what's the point that I'm trying to get across to you in here, and what Kierkegaard is talking about? It's the point that when it comes to your stance on God and your orientation to God, you should be kind of crazy. Okay? Like, and that's the argument that he has a big long thing about Abraham, which I'm not reading. If you want, you can. I'm just reading the Wikipedia page, by the way.
Also, it's a good source.
Yeah, just wiki Knight of Faith. You can read that whole thing, okay? It's really good. But the point that I'm trying to make to you, that what we believe as Christians is crazy. It is wild. Like it, and a lot of times it doesn't make sense. And at a certain point, you do kind of just need to embrace it. And when you embrace that, you will actually be able to do things that you weren't able to do previously. You'll be able to do things that, and this is where he talks about how, this is why he has like the religious level at the highest level, because you'll be doing things that, so whenever he says the aesthetic level, he kind of just means like basic what you see, right? So you could almost think of it as like an imperial or an empiricist level, like scientific materialism, just what you see. Just on what you see, it doesn't work. The ethical level is almost like what you can rationalize, what you can think of. But even on that level, it's like, okay, any average person that talks about the ethical implications of the Abraham story, they will all tell you, oh, that's a terrible God. That's a terrible, like what Abraham did there was terrible. Like sacrificing his son, would do blood sacrifices. That's awful. And it's like, who would do blood sacrifices? And we all do blood sacrifices. Like what's going on in Ukraine right now? That's a massive blood sacrifice. Like Putin is sacrificing his soldiers for something. The Ukrainians are sacrificing their citizens for something, right? Like we all do this. Everyone does this. And the only way that it stops is whenever enough blood has been spilled. Like literally, right?
Either there's no more blood to be spilled, or you just realize, okay, let's stop.
Exactly. Either everybody gets fed up or everyone's dead, right? And so even on that aspect of it, in some ways, like enough blood needs to get spilled. What if we have it so that the highest being's blood is spilled, right? And that's basically what the sacrifice of Jesus is. So part of the way that I now think about that phrasing of what is Abraham thinking there, I sort of frame it a little bit in what Kierkegaard is talking about here. And that it's just embracing the absurd, embracing the craziness of the situation. And it's basically saying, God, I don't get this. I don't understand this. But I have an expectation that you're going to make all of this work out. And you still might feel, right, as he talks about, you still might feel that infinite resignation of, right? So what does infinite resignation means? Like being a total pessimist, just being like, this isn't going to work out, which personally, I feel like all the time, right? That's how I feel about what's going on in Ukraine right now. Like, this is not going to work out. It's how I feel about my job. I'm like, I hate this stupid job, right? Like, this isn't going to work out, right? You feel this about a lot of different things. But despite feeling that way, that's not how you act. That's not what you do. What you do is you have the faith to go forward and believe that that through God, it's going to be made right. You just don't know how the heck that's going to happen. Does that make sense? Okay. All right.
I at first was wondering why you jumped to the conclusion that when he does say the servants, I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you, because in the English language, come could mean I come, I will come, or we will come.
It
But
could-
I was like, hold on, is Hebrew like basically every other language and they conjugate for different subjects? And so when I looked at Spanish, it was future we, and
Okay.
Italian was also future we.
Okay.
So it'd be worth looking into, like, okay, what does Hebrew say? Does Hebrew conjugate verb like that? I don't know.
I don't know.
But I feel like that's a kind of a big point, because if it does say in the Hebrew we, then yeah, Abraham is 100% like, we're coming back.
Both of us.
I don't know how, but it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Soon.
Exactly.
I feel like there's a pretty big changer.
The other thing I was thinking about why Abraham says a statement like that is it kind of fits his MO to like say not exactly lies, but not really upfront truths either. And he does the exact same thing in this same chapter earlier when Isaac asks him, "So where's the sacrifice?" He's like, "God will provide one." And it's like, that was true.
Yes.
Isaac
And it also
provided by
means that,
God.
yeah, exactly.
Like that. So
But
you're
also,
provided there.
and the crazy thing is, Abraham also says that not knowing that he's right for the wrong reasons. You know what I
Yes.
mean? Like it's crazy.
Right. Like he says the thing, and you get that a lot, actually. Like you get that, right? You get that with like with like the disciples, right? And where like Peter's like, "You're the Christ." He says a thing that's right, but he doesn't know really why he's right. He doesn't really get it, and that's the thing that happens like a bunch. Anything else?
Also, Abraham didn't realize that he was, in a sense, prophesying by saying God will provide for himself. Because not just today, but in 2,000 years or however.
Yeah, it's gonna be something like that, like there 1500, something like that. Yeah. Okay.
Place of which God had told him. Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand.
And if you have the step, you can click on bound there, and it says a yeka, but it's got it with a like a Q in the step Bible.
And took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said,
Again, that's also the Abraham reference to why I'm like, who's saying it in that one? Yeah, okay. Makes sense.
Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked. Behold, behind him was a ram, caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, The Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said,
So
By myself.
just stopping to, like, I feel like we've kind of talked about everything that I wanted to say about this, but also you can look at that difference between God will provide a lamb, but God provides a ram in this, and it relates to then later in the Gospel of John, where that is precisely why John uses the language of "Behold the Lamb of God," where whenever a lot of Messiah, a lot of stuff of Messiah and Christ references in the Old Testament that Jews at the time would have recognized as being related to the Messiah. Lamb language wasn't necessarily used a lot. The only one that you can kind of is like where it says something along the lines of like, in the day of the Lord, the lion and the lamb will like, the lion and the lamb will lay down together. It's not really the same thing as relating it to like the lamb of God or like the Passover lamb or like what that means.
Because you don't
His
sacrifice
role as
that lamb is lying.
yeah, it's more of a statement about peace
Yeah.
than anything else. And so it's like in the day of the Lord, like there'll be like ultimate peace, right? You have that idea. But so so just be aware of that and notice how it's interesting that John is doing in the gospel of relating that idea right there to Jesus.
I was kind of wondering and wanted to ask, but so like every time like in worship something and when we're praising and stuff, whenever we say that, it's going all the way back.
Yes, it is going all the way back and referencing. Yeah, yes, and that's kind of why
we don't talk about that.
Well, and that's why I was trying to say, like at the beginning of this, it's like this is like in the context of like the Bible itself, this is like an atomic bomb like thing of being like it goes everywhere and it goes out. It's a mushroom cloud that goes out and touches all the rest of the Bible, and so you're constantly going to be like almost everything else that like we discuss can in some way be eventually referenced back to this moment in the same way that like in my opinion the only other moment in the Bible that is as significant as this part right here is the crucifixion of Christ. Like in the same way, the crucifixion of Christ goes out and touches everything else in the scriptures. And so yes. And so that's why I'm like, it's hard for me to be like, okay, what are all the ways that like you should be aware of this story? It's like it's gonna come up like in everything. Like it really is.
It also feels good that it's a ram and not a lamb, so that there's no confusion about who is like the Lamb of God. So you can't then claim that like this actual
Yes.
is the
Yeah,
Lamb of
that's what
God.
he's talking about. Yeah, you can't use you're because of the position of what they are, you're forced to be like, ooh, that's not the lamb. Like something was provided there, but it wasn't the lamb. It was something different. And so you have that idea of that open question mystery being still in there.
Do you think that being a ram has to do at all with like foretelling the gender of Jesus, or no? Because it was like a boy sheep.
I don't think so.
No.
I think the more likelihood of that would just be all of the son of David talk.
Well,
Son
also,
imagery with
I was
Isaac,
gonna
the
say,
one and
they
only
had
son.
kids. Oh, they all had one daughter, maybe. I don't care.
It needed horns
Yeah,
to be caught.
I think definitely the thing that does it for me on what gender he's gonna be is take your son, your only son.
Yeah.
That line there is
Well,
probably
yeah,
what's gonna
yeah.
Don't shade it for us, man.
Yeah.
The Muslims didn't read that line.
Well,
Yeah.
well, it depends on what why only is important, because also
Yes.
like in what way is Jesus the only Son of God? Whenever
Yes.
we also believe in like a Trinity, so like how, and then also like what does Son
Well,
of God
'cause
mean in
Abraham
that sense? So
technically
it's like
had a
only
second
has a
son.
different context than like how you can relate.
because Abraham technically had a second
It-
son.
Yes. Well,
But it says-
but it's
He had nothing to do
we
with it.
call Jesus the firstborn of all creation. What does that mean? If you take a Jehovah Witness standpoint and you say, oh, that means that he's the first created being, you're so wrong. You're just miles off the mark. Because A, Jesus isn't a created being, and B, he wasn't created chronologically first. So what does the New Testament mean whenever they say that, like, Jesus is the firstborn of all creation?
Well, he's like the first
What,
of us.
what it means is that he is the highest thing above all creation. That's what it means. It's a status and ranking description. So whenever it says that he's your only son here, it's not a chronological thing. It's not a you are the only son. It's a status thing of you are the only son of the line and the promises of that. You're the covenant son. You're the one that he promised that is coming from that line. That's why what's given to Ishmael is added bonus side thing that God promises, but isn't the main thing. And so there's a lot of different like language like that, but just if you look at the other languages in the New Testament, you can clearly see it's like, oh, that's not what they mean by that. That's not what they're talking about.
I realize it's kind of interesting how, since like you're saying, like when John wrote, that's why he wrote the Lamb of God. So John, all the stuff that you're talking about now, John realized that, and that's what he would have called him the Lamb of God.
Yes.
So he
And
realized
it's actually, and it's one.
fulfilling that. He would have in
It is debatable whether or not he knew that at the time. So one of the things that's interesting, and so this is why I specifically said John says this, is because I don't think he actually gets referred to as the Lamb of God in the Synoptic Gospels. I'd have to go back and check that, but I don't think that he is. It's a point that John hammers home like crazy. This is one of the reasons why, like people like Bart Ehrman and all these people, they go crazy about like the stuff that John does in his gospel, because John is just doing things, and like people are like, Jesus dies on a different day in John's gospel than in the other ones. That's not technically true, but what John does is John uses very confusing wording, but he's using very confusing wording on purpose because he's trying to tie Jesus to the Passover lamb. That's what he's doing in the Passion narrative, is he's trying to tie Jesus to the idea of Jesus being the ultimate Passover lamb. And so John does this like a bunch in what he's doing. And so yes, at some point in his life, because also the Gospel of John is the last gospel that is written. John also lives way longer than all the other disciples. At some point in John's life, he put all of these ideas together and was like, this is what I'm going to put down on paper. Now, does that mean that I'm saying that for sure these things were not said by so whenever I say that, I'm talking about John the disciple, but it is John the Baptist that says that line. Does he actually say that in history? I don't know. Maybe, probably, if I'm going to believe in a certain level of inerrancy of the scriptures. Yeah, he did. He probably did. Was it, if he did say it, was it only, you then have to come to the conclusion that it was mainly only John the disciple that found that phrasing important because he's the only one that uses it. But yeah, at some point, John the disciple was like, "This is a very significant, like theme that I'm gonna talk about here." And
Because I was wondering on behalf of the whole, just the thought that, okay, well, if someone in the time of Jesus could have made that connection, then of course, John was had different spirit from a lot of the other Jews at the time.
sure,
Theoretically,
could somebody have put it together?
yeah, other people who, yeah. I'm
Maybe,
not saying you need an answer, but I'm
but
just saying,
yeah,
maybe, yeah.
maybe, but I mean, as it's demonstrated from what we know occurred, it would have been really hard because it was really what was going on was, and this is even like what Paul does. It's what all of the disciples were doing after Jesus died and after the resurrection and after the ascension. All of them were like, we need to go read our Bibles again. And like they all like go back and are just like, we're just scanning scripture and we're like, did we miss stuff? And basically that's what they concluded was they're like, oh, we missed stuff like left and right. Like, how did we miss all of this stuff that was like in the scriptures and that was clearly like pertaining to what is going on with Jesus and what his life was? And that's part of the reason why Matthew and Mark are just constantly like quoting scripture because they're constantly basically what they're doing is they're like, we missed stuff here, guys. This is the stuff that we missed, and this is how it relates and all this stuff. And like, so they bring that back all the time. And that's really what they're doing. It's kind of why Luke is a little bit different because Luke doesn't, if memory
Luke
serves,
doesn't cite his sources.
Luke does cite his sources, but Luke's sources are more likely eyewitness sources than they are scriptural sources, whereas the other ones are more scriptural sources, is what they're referencing. Oh, we're already at past 8. We're near the end. Let's try and finish it up.
And declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your own son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice.
Okay, so I do want to talk a little bit about that word offspring there. And the idea of I will make your offspring as the stars of heaven and as sand on the seashore. Again, there's this idea of we read that as a quantity and as a number, and there's going to be a lot of them, which, yeah, probably what he's saying. But there's also a reading of that where you can read it as a quality and as a height thing that gets into some like divine council stuff. But then there's also this idea of, and this is a line that wasn't said previously, right? Because God has kind of said this little like quote thing of saying what the covenant is multiple times, right? And this line of, and your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies. That was not said previously. The other parts, right? And in your offspring, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, blah, blah, blah. But the possession of the gate of your enemy. that is part of why you have this, that right there is a part of why you have this idea of the Messiah being a kingly ruler, right? Because you're gonna take other people's cities. Whoever is your enemy, you're gonna take their land. You're gonna take what they have. How, if what Christians are saying is that Christians believe that like Christ is the Messiah, how does Christ fulfill that aspect of this? This relates to, I'm not going to be able to, I don't have the time to go over this, but it's a reference to Jesus beating the crap out of Satan, is what it is. Okay. And there's a bunch of stuff about the gates of Bashan, and the Mount Hermon, which are all places in the north of Israel, and those get referred to also as the gates of hell, and or like the gates of where like the evil powers live. And it's not an accident that where Jesus is from, which is Nazareth. Do you guys know where Nazareth is geographically?
It's north of Jerusalem.
It's north of Jerusalem. It's actually very north. It's kind of even like a little bit north of the Galilee. And it is very near what this place gets referred to as the gates of like Bashan or whatever. That's the thing that Michael Heiser talks about in a book that I don't own yet, but I'm going to get. Yes, because he mentions it in his podcast all the time. But it's the idea of, so that's just a reference to Jesus taking over the power that Satan has over the dead, because the thing that Satan has, or rather that death has dominion over, which again, death is an ancient Canaanite god, Mot has them. And this is why Paul eventually will say the line of death, where is your sting? Right. That's personification of death, but he's also referring to death as in like this kind of like rival god thing. And basically he's whenever he says, where is your sting? It's like, where is your power? Where is your power that you have over us? And the point is that through Christ, you no longer have power over that. He's broken you. He has taken, he has gone into your city, and he has taken your plunder. He's taken everything from you. And that's like a reference to that. And there are lots of references to Jesus doing things like that, especially in Revelation. But I'll leave that there. Let's try and wrap this up. This last little part is not much.
So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba. And Abraham lived at Beersheba. Now after these things it was told to Abraham, behold, Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor, Uz his firstborn, Buz his brother, Kemuel the father of Aram, Kesed, Ezo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. Bethuel fathered Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. Moreover, his concubine, whose name was Reumah, bore Tebah, Gaham, Tahash, and Maacah.
Okay, so this little genealogy is mostly just set up for next chapter, because Rebecca is about to be introduced. And so I wasn't really going to cover that section all that much, but just to say that it's another kind of example of um, big significant event happens, followed by a genealogy to kind of space out the timing of like the events, and also to kind of um, section off like this is like the climax of this section. Now we move on to like the next section. And so in my opinion, that's kind of like why that's there. That's why you get like a genealogy after like Noah, and you get like genealogy after like the Tower of Babel, and like you have these little like, and like you have the fall genealogy. You have yeah, you have like the Genesis 6 stuff, genealogy, and you have Noah genealogy. You have this genealogy. So it's kind of mapping that pattern a little bit. That's all I have. Like I said, could have covered different stuff a little bit more. The only other thing I did want to do a thing about that would take too long. I did want to do a little thing about how I know at the start of the chapter, right, it says, and after these things, God tested Abraham. Part of the reason why I like that song is because I personally think it's wrong to view this, and I think I mentioned this earlier. I think it's wrong to view what's happening here like solely as a test. Yes, testing is occurring, but it's not merely a test. It's more like a revelation, and those have overlaps, right? Because whatever you're testing, you're revealing your information, like your knowledge of whatever study material that you have, right? So they're kind of overlapping things. But part of the reason why I do this is because I really hate it whenever people try to say that this life is just a test. And it's like you maybe you've heard that a lot, like we're here and this existence is just a test. And a lot of times people will even say like it's a test, or it's kind of implied like it's a test of like whether or not you're good enough, or like you're good or bad or whatever, right? And in my opinion, that's really the wrong way to view reality. um in my opinion, the right way to view reality and what's going on is that it's not a test, it's a chance, it's an opportunity to choose what your orientation is going to be. Is your orientation going to be up, or is your orientation going to be down? And choosing a downward orientation also the same as choosing an orientation like towards yourself. Like basically, and it doesn't even necessarily need to be down. It's, are you not pointing at quite the highest thing? Are you pointing at not quite God? Are you pointing at the Tower of Babel? Are you pointing at your own fame, your own renown? Are you pointing at something like that? Are you pointing at mere goodness, right? So like I think of this a lot of so right now with Ukraine, you have all these celebrities that are just like make slam poetry about, can't we just have peace, right? And it's like, okay, you have this idea of peace being the highest thing, and you're oriented towards that peace, but that peace isn't that's not the highest thing. Like that's not quite it, because yeah, you might get that peace, but that peace might come at the sacrifice of all of the Ukrainians, because guess what? There won't be any more war in Ukraine after all Ukrainians are dead, right? And so it's like just having this simplistic, oh, I don't want there to be war, or I don't want there to be this. It's not quite the thing. And so really what life is a chance to say, do I want to orient myself towards God, and do I want to draw nearer to him, and do I want to be closer to him? And that's what I think is going on in this story. That's what I think life is. And so I think that's something that's not quite the same thing as just a simple test. I could go on about that, but I won't, because I know this went way longer than it should have. Questions, comments, anything?
Well, there are just tons of other, well, it's funny to call them references here because that technically makes them prophecies because they're
Sure.
Favorite one of mine is making Isaac Wood.
Mhm.
That was cool.
Yeah, and well, yeah, I already mentioned, but the walking up a hill,
the hill being actually close around Jerusalem, if not.
I mean, it's probably not Golgotha, which is a different hill.
But it's close. It's close enough.
Yep.
Definitely.
Yep.
I mean, tons of other ones. Also, obviously, take your son, your only son. Who
Yep.
love that whole idea. There's a donkey in there. 3 days. Yeah. Cool stuff.
I felt like it might have been important in like this symbology.
Don't worry about it. Just say
Okay.
whatever you're saying.
Okay, that he said, take your son, your only son, even though he technically had another son, and he words it as Jesus is like his only son, even though technically we're all his kids. So I felt like maybe there was symbolicness. There we go.
Yes.
That's more of a word. I felt like there was a symbolicness there.
Well, because but it's
like
a part of
the
this is
highest son.
right, and
Not like only, but the highest, because in each case
And
there
thi-
were
and
kind
this
of
is-
like lesser sons.
and this is where I talked about that it's what Abraham's doing is in offering Isaac, Abraham is offering it's like the same thing as offering the best version of himself, right? Because like it's like your kids are what go out after you, and right, and everybody kind of has this innate idea of you want your kids to kind of be better than you are, right? And even if you're a crappy parent, like you usually want that. You usually want your kids to be better than you are. And so in offering your son, your only son, or that idea of only son, it's like you're offering all of the best of you. And so yeah, so that's the way that I think about it. Is that that's what God is asking for, and that's what God gives with Jesus. He gives all of like the best of himself.
And how the Muslims tried to say that Ishmael was the highest son.
Yeah, I mean, it's still like the same idea symbolically in that aspect of it. Anything else? Okay, I'm gonna end it there. Thank you all for